The sea has many secrets, dark and unfathomable mysteries that lie beneath its crashing waves. Off the rugged coast of Brittany, France, where jagged cliffs meet the churning Atlantic, an ancient legend has endured for centuries. On certain nights, when the fog rolls in thick as a shroud, those who dare to venture near the water's edge are said to hear something unnatural, a sound that chills the blood and sets the heart pounding in primal fear. The tolling of bells, mournful and haunting, drifting in from the sea itself. According to the legends, these are the bells of a cursed cathedral, swallowed whole by the merciless ocean centuries ago. A house of faith, now lying in unholy ruins on the seabed, its towers and spires protruding from the inky depths like the grasping claws of a drowned leviathan. And as the fog envelops the coastline in its pale, ghostly embrace, those haunting bells are not the only thing to emerge from the deep. An unholy procession of hooded figures has been seen gliding across the water, solemn, silent, neither living nor dead. The whispers of those who have witnessed this chilling spectacle carry the same dreadful tale. These are the spirits of the drowned monks who once called that sunken cathedral their home, cursed to roam the earth until their secrets, whatever unholy mysteries they guard, are finally unveiled. So brace yourself, dear listeners, as we delve into the dark heart of the legend of the Sunken Cathedral. A tale where the veil between this world and the next grows perilously thin on the haunted shores of Brittany. Pray you never hear those bells tolling through the fog. The fog crept in from the sea that night, an insidious pale shroud that smothered the coast in deathly silence. As the cold tendrils snaked across the village of Port-Blanc-Nez, the very air seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive with each passing minute. It was as if some unseen force had extended its clammy hand over the coastal hamlet, muffling every sound, every whisper of the wind, until all that remained was an unearthly hush, the kind of stillness that presses in on you from all sides, as though the fog itself had become a living force, ready to smother the unwary. The narrow village streets lay deserted and still as a tomb, the golden pools of street lamplight seemingly swallowed up by that impenetrable white murk. Not a soul stirred, as if the fog's icy caress had frozen the townsfolk in their homes, frozen with a primal dread none dare speak aloud. For the good people of Port-Blanc-Nez knew the dangers that came hand in hand with such unnatural fogs rolling in from the sea. They knew the signs, the dreadful omens, passed down through generations of Brittany seafarers. A mist like this was a veil between worlds, they whispered, when the shroud between the living and the dead grew perilously thin. It was on nights like these that one risked bearing witness to unholy things, profane sights that could shred a soul, or drive a mind straight into madness with a single glimpse, and as that spectral fog smothered the village, plunging the streets into a cocoon of unnatural white silence, the dread mounted with each labored heartbeat. The townsfolk shuttered their windows and barred their doors against whatever unholy presences might choose to manifest on such an accursed night. All, that is, except for young Isabeau Rousseau. Isabeau Rousseau should have known better than to defy her parents' warnings and venture out into that unearthly fog. But the young woman's curiosity had always been her greatest weakness, an insatiable drive to unravel mysteries that too often led her down perilous paths. So, despite the dread premonitions surrounding such unnatural mists, Isabeau found herself pulled by some unseen force into the pale, oppressive murk blanketing the village streets. The fog seemed to swallow her whole as she wandered, blind and disoriented, the dim street lamps doing little to penetrate that clawing veil. An unnatural hush hung in the air, a deathly silence that felt utterly suffocating, as if the very fog had muffled and smothered every natural sound until all that remained was the thump of Isabeau's frantic heartbeat ringing in her ears. That, and something else. A sound so faint at first that the young woman could scarcely tell if it was real, or just her mind playing tricks in this unearthly realm. A tolling, like the peal of a bell, seemingly drifting through the fog itself. Low and mournful, like the lament of an soul adrift in purgatory. It raised the hairs on the back of Isabeau's neck, that chilling disembodied ringing from nowhere and everywhere at once. She shuddered, trembling hands coming up to hug herself tightly, as dread coiled like a serpent in a pit of her stomach. This was no ordinary bell she heard tolling through the mists. Of that she felt certain. These were the bells the old stories warned about, the tales whispered by firelight on dark nights when the fishermen returned from the sea, with terror shadowing their salt-bitten faces. The bells of a cursed, drowned cathedral that could not be heard tolling from the depths. Isabeau froze in her tracks, every primal instinct screaming at her to run, to flee from whatever tent presence had decided to make itself known on this accursed night. Her breath caught in her throat as that disembodied ringing grew louder, more insistent, raining out through the spectral fog in a dread cacophony. Then, from somewhere out in the impenetrable white murk, a new sound joined the tolling bells. The faint thump and shuffle of footsteps. Many footsteps, out there amidst the mists, drawing ever nearer. Isabeau's pounding heart felt liable to burst from her chest as the eerie procession of footsteps drew nearer through the enveloping fog. She fought every urge to turn and flee blindly, her primal instincts screaming at her to run from whatever unholy presence was manifesting itself on this accursed night. But the young woman's innate curiosity had always outweighed her sense of self-preservation. So despite her mind's panicked protests, Isabeau remained rooted to the spot, straining her senses against the miasma of mist to discern the source of the ominous sounds. The disembodied tolling of bells seemed to swell from the vapor itself, growing in volume and intensity until it reverberated in her very bones. It mingled hauntingly with the steady cadence of those shuffling footfalls, marching in time with the mournful peals, as if the very fog had taken corporeal form. Then a new sound pierced the unnatural silence, a ragged, wheezing inhalation, like the rattle of death's own breath. It raised the hairs on the back of Isabeau's neck, her pulse thundering as she realized the dreadful truth. These were no ordinary footsteps she heard, nor any rendent spirit roused by the unholy thought. This was an entire procession making its way through the mists, a somber march of forms beginning to coalesce in the swirling vapors just ahead. Dark, hooded figures, their rotted robes clinging to the skeletal builds beneath like living shrouds. Hunched, weathered things that glided across the slit cobblestones with an unnatural gait, silent save for their rasping, papery breaths. Isabeau's hands flew to her mouth to stifle her scream of primal terror. These forlorn specters could be none other than the legend made manifest, the ghastly procession of drowned monks from the tales of the elders, the cursed souls who had called the Sunken Cathedral their unholy home, now condemned to wander the mortal realm on nights when the veil between worlds grew thinnest. Drawing ever nearer to Isabeau, their hooded faces cast in shadow, she saw their desiccated hands emerge from those rotting robes, grasping twisted strands of kelp, like they'd just risen from the briny deep, and in their midst, stretching ahead into the impenetrable fog, the unmistakable outlines of ancient stonework began to take form, crumbling arches and pitted spires protruding from the very earth, as if the cursed cathedral itself were pulling free of the depths to follow this damned parade of penitent spirits. The ringing of those submerged bells intensified to a soul-shredding crescendo. Isabeau felt her grasp on reality slipping as the spectral outline of that drowned house of faith solidified in her midst. Despite her mind's screams of denial, that unholy edifice had manifested before her, and accursed monks guarding its accursed portals did not take kindly to the sight of mortal trespassers on their unhallowed domain. Isabeau felt her sanity teetering on the brink As the full spectral horror emerged from the enshrouding fog, the withered, hooded forms resolving into the unmistakable shapes of drowned monks, bluish flesh sloughing from their bones, and tattered robes dripping with brine, as if they'd just risen from the depths. Her mind reeled, unable to process the profane sight of this cursed procession escorting the dripping remains of their submerged cathedral into the village streets. Thick stone walls and crumbling arches materialized from the mists, festooned with funereal strands of dripping kelp, and barnacle-encrusted gargoyles leering from on high. The ringing of those stand bells burrowed like rusty nails into Isabeau's mind, a cacophony of torment reverberating from every sookly pitted spire and rain-scoured belfry turret. The monks marched in solemn, staggered steps around the perimeter, guiding their unholy edifice ever onward, their sunken eyes fixated straight ahead, as if in an eternal trance. Isabeau's throat seized around the scream, desperate to escape her lips. Her skull pounded in time with the tolling of those profane bells, as her mind struggled to reject the cursed sight before her. This could not be real. This had to be some fever dream or delusion brought on by the unnatural fog. Yet, with every shambling step that damned clerical procession took, the manifested cathedral grew more horrifically solid. The reek of sodden timber and rotting seaweed washed over Isabeau in a wave, the very earth shuddering beneath her feet, as if that unholy edifice were literally dragging itself free of its briny grave. The monks moved stiffly, desiccated flesh clinging to their bones, as they took their positions around the cathedral's dripping sanctuary. Several turned their withered faces towards Isabeau, empty sockets boring into her from beneath their cloaks as their jaws worked soundlessly, trying in vain to speak. Or was that the first hitch of an unearthly scream of torment building in their shriveled chests, finally awakening to the presence of an unwitting intruder in their midst? A tremor of primal terror lanced through Isabeau's core. Even if she could unshackle her voice to cry out, there was no one to hear her screams on this forsaken night, no one to bear witness except these hellish revenants and their cursed house of worship as it heaved itself fully into the mortal plane. The intensity of the tolling bells peaked in a deafening clamor, as if the very peal of bronze itself pierced through reality to tear an unholy rift into the night. The sea air thrashed and swirled in cyclonic force, staining Isabeau's face with the acrid tang of brine and decay. The monks raised their bony arms in eerie synchronicity, sightless gazes upturned in abject devotion to the horror taking form before them. A series of creaks, groans, and rumbles built from within that lightless sanctuary as something else began to stir behind those dripping walls, something far older and fouler than these wretched revenants daring to tread the mortal realm. Something for which these piteous souls had damned themselves mind, body, and soul to serve. Isabeau's throat burned as if scraped raw with wristed nails. At long last, her voice found release in a single piercing shriek of abject terror, as the true malefic presence anchored within, that cursed, blighted fame awoke with then holy purpose. Isabeau's mind reeled as the ghastly fragments of the drowned monastery's origins pierced your consciousness like shards of obsidian. The spectral legends she had dismissed as fanciful fireside tales now manifested in profane reality before her stricken eyes. These withered, dripping husks shuffling in funereal cadence were the last unrepentant monks of that blasphemous order, the ones who had willingly sacrificed their very souls to proceed their unholy secrets down through the centuries, no matter the costs to themselves or the unspeakable pacts they'd been forced to accept. A fresh wave of primal terror lanced through Isabeau at the realization that this was no mere haunting or chance spiritual visitation on the night of the unholy fog. No, this spectral procession of penitent horrors had a far darker purpose, one that threatened to shatter her tremulous grasp on reality entirely. For as the drowned monks took up their solemn vigil around the sanctuary's perimeter, something drevnioislia probudilos glibokobanu ogo proplia togo, obrekanogo master, a sentient presence far older than these rotted revenants, something for which they had quite literally gone to hell and back to appease. The raging peal of those blasphemous bells reached a soul-scorching crescendo that reverberated through every wanton beam and fissured rampart. An unearthly wind gusted from the dripping arches, flaying Isabeau's face with the charnel reek of the deep, as the very earth seemed to shudder and quake. From somewhere within the lightless recesses of that cursed faint sanctuary, something colossal began to stir. The monks froze in their tracks, withered arms raising in sick synchronicity, as if guided by the same unspeakable will. Then, in a single sickening moment, every empty socket in their desiccated skulls blazed with eldritch blue flame. The unnatural flare cast their sunken features in sickly, wavering light, as their jaws lolled open, releasing the first rattling gasps of what could only be described as profane ecstasy. Isabeau's throat burned raw with the scream desperately clawing to escape her lips. Every rational instinct shrieked at her to turn and flee from this place, this unholy ceremony that mortal eyes were never meant to witness. But she remained rooted in place, petrified and choking on sheer visceral terror. For as that blinding xenoflame consumed the withered minx skulls, the true shape of the eldritch entity they had sold their souls to serve began to unfurl from the drowned cathedral's haunted core. An entity far more ancient and malevolent than any legend dared speak its true name. A sightless, primordial horror whose presence alone threatened to reduce Isabeau's sanity to smoldering cinders as it spread its tenebrous influence. The monks swayed in rapturous torment, withered jaws agape, as billowing nebulas of black ichor and pulsing, feverish light began to seep from every crack and fissure in their defiled house of worship. This was no haunting, Isabeau realized in a blinding epiphany of hysteria and mortal dread. The legends lied, or only scratched at the deepest, most profane kernels of truth humanity was meant to know. On this forsaken night of the mere fog, 10 billion aprosto bedni duki, ski to ustra neja pos semel the puss pop vec no goupo koi enya. This malefic force, this entity whose true name shredded all semblance of sanity, was the Tsina. These damned souls had obsessively guarded for centuries. The privatel of the profane knowledge they had sold their very souls to protect. And as acrid, choking miasmas of black ichor oozed from that sunken cathedral's lips in pulsating eddies of mad, gibbering light, Isabeau came face to face with the eternal secret of the drowned monastery itself. For a single, shattering heartbeat, she drowned in the nameless abyss of that eldritch horror's true form, before her mind mercifully shuddered into the oblivion of unconsciousness, leaving only burbling, keening screams ringing on the night air, as the sunken cathedral birthed its eternal secret onto the mortal plane. Darkness, endless, suffocating darkness pressing in from all sides like a living force intent on sniffing out Isabeau's last flickers of consciousness. Her mind felt adrift in that oblivion, unmoored from any sense of reality save for the lingering psychic impression of that eldritch horror's true form soared onto her psyche. How much time had passed since her mind mercifully shuddered from that profane revelation in Port-Blanc-Nez? Had it only been moments, or an eternity spent drifting through realms of madness no mortal was ever meant to glimpse? A distant ringing began to coalesce in the void, faint at first, but rapidly swelling into the unmistakable peal of those stand bells that had heralded the sunken cathedral's manifestation. The sound lanced through Isabeau's faunless existence like razor wires of auditory torment. She tried to cry out, to beg for the ringing to cease its soul-shredding clamor, but her voice was little more than a whisper drowned out by the resonating peals of profaned bronze, as if the very bells themselves sought to keep her trapped in that endless void, forever caught in the thrall of their mournful toll. Then a flicker of pale, watery illumination split the blackness, a dim circle of fuzzy light burning brighter with each punishing peal. Isabeau's consciousness felt drawn towards the small lighthouse beacon in the eddying tides of that abyssal realm, pulled by unseen currents through dark, clutching tendrils, until the pale glow finally blossomed into blinding brilliance. With a ragged gasp, Isabeau's eyes flew open as she crashed back into the waking world. every nerve ending ablaze with searing cold. Her teeth chattered violently as the unforgiving lash of Arctic wind knifed through her rain-soaked clothes. The clawing stench of brine and sodden detritus assailing your senses. Squinting against the pale, pre-dawn gloom, Isabeau strained to get her bearings. She found herself sprawled amidst a jumbled tangle of salt-scoured driftwood and jagged rock outcroppings. Somewhere along the village's desolate shoreline, if the roar of crashing surf was any indication, how in heaven's name had she ended up half drowned and battered on these god-forsaken rocks? The last thing her addled mind could grasp was the abject horror of the Sunken Cathedral's profane unveiling back in the village streets before that nameless horse drew form, shredded what remained of her sanity. Had she fled in blind terror, only to somehow end up cast ashore in the depths of the cruel Brittany night? Was this entire spectral encounter nothing but the cruelest fever dream induced by the uncanny fog? The disembodied ringing of those stand bells split the dawning gloom like a banshee's wail, rippling across the restless waters and setting Isabeau's teeth on edge. That accursed sound could mean only one thing. The nightmarish procession and the Sunken Cathedral itself were still at large on this benighted morning. Another sound joined the tolling peals, distant but rapidly growing more distinct amidst the roar of the surf crashing against the rocks. The rhythmic thump of footsteps in the shallows, unnaturally in sync, as if made by a multitude of feet, all marching in perfect lockstep. A chorus of rasping, papery breaths underscored the funereal cadence, sending currents of ice water lancing through Isabeau's veins. She knew that labored, bubbling wheeze all too well. The unmistakable death rattles of the hooded, dripping penitents escorting their cursed sanctuary's wake. Fighting a wave of nausea and terror, Isabeau hauled herself upright just as the first dark shapes began to materialize on the misty shoreline. The hunched, cadaverous forms of the drowned monks lurched and staggered with each step, withered feet sloshing through the shallows as they escorted their ghastly procession. Once again the unmistakable architecture of the Sunken Cathedral heaved into view, this time wading through the waves themselves, as if the profaned house of faith, and set its sights on the open sea. Each dripping arch and crumbling spire was illuminated in garish, sickly light by the fell azure flames burning in the monks' empty sockets. Another chorus of rattling, phlegmy ecstasy issued from those withered penitents as they raised their bony arms in eerie synchronicity, silently beckoning their horrific matron's entrance. Isabeau's mind rattled and splintered like shards of broken glass as the drowned monks' procession marched inexorably forward through the surging tide. Their hooded forms staggered and lurched across the shallows, escorting the dread manifestation of the sunken cathedral itself, wading through the frigid waves. She remained frozen amid the salt's coward detritus, every primal instinct screaming at her to flee from this blasphemous spectacle, even as her rational mind strained to reject its existence. That each time those damned bells tolled their mournful peal across the restless waters, the horror before her eyes took on more horrifying substantiality. The derelict arches and pitted spires gleamed in the pale, sickly luminescence cast by the azure flames, consuming the monks' withered skulls. Tenebrous miasmas of black-eyed horror and half-glimpsed aberrations roiled in the shadowed recesses of the cursed fane, threatening to birth fresh cosmic blasphemies onto the mortal plane, with every rasping exhalation from those dense souls. A frantic, shuddering exhalation punched from Isabeau's lips as the cathedral's defiled bell finally heaved free of the shallows to fully unveil itself before her stricken gaze. Entire sections of the Eldritch masonry seemed phased out of existence entirely, replaced by oily vortices of pulsating xenolite leaking from the very stones themselves. Though the cathedral itself dated back to an age before recorded history, the spectral iconography adorning its buttresses and friezes appeared to originate from far more ancient, unutterable eras. Occult hieroglyphs and profane symbology writhed in perpetual motion, continually re-inscribing themselves in ways that set Isabeau's vision swimming. It was as if the damned edifice existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, phases of its unholy existence from disparate realities, all coalescing within those lambent archaeological layers. Constellations of flickering primordial suns burned in the depths of cyclopean windows where stained glass should have resided. Alien, non-Euclidean geometries endlessly kaleidoscoped across the stonework in patterns that striated your vision. Worst of all were the gargoyles themselves, things never sculpted by any hand of man or god. Corrupted monstrosities of radial symmetry and protruding angles, fashioned in mockery of all conventional biology. Their forms seemed to sift and crawl across the end-fane's stonework in capering motions just beyond normal perception. A series of grating croaks and gurgles bibbled from the gathered monks, all empty sockets and desiccated jaws affixed heavenward, as if worshipping something vast and cosmic heaving into existence above that cursed sanctuary's ruined altar. Those sounds swelled in profane, unnerving synchronicity, as more and more nebulous black shapes began to coalesce around the blasphemous cathedral's crumbling spires. Isabeau's throat burned with the shriek of mortal terror forever lodged there as more eldritch manifestations stirred from the sunken cathedral's unholy core. The cyclopean vortex of mad chromatic light pulsing beneath those ancient, salt-pitted arches, the writhing, endlessly permutating glyphs and protoplasmic miasmas of aberrant geometries birthing forth in ponderous, viscous rhythms. It dawned on her, in a flood of primal hysteria, that this was no mere haunting, no chance encounter with the restless spirits of drowned souls seeking atonement or a final peace. This This was something far older than humanity's inconsequential ages. A cosmic horror, a profane sentience perhaps as primordial as the lightless trenches it had been interred within for untold epochs. Something that the blasphemous drowned monks had awoken, and sold what tattered remnants of their souls remained to serve as eternal guardians over. To curate and venerate this entity's cyclopean, trans-dimensional nature, until the stars themselves boiled away into lightless entropy. For there, in that horrific, existential moment, as more and more abstract, alien appendages of kaleidoscopic, unlight furled in ponderous undulations from the nadir of the Sunken Cathedral's sanctuary, Isabeau bore full witness to the true face of the horror her ancestors' legends had only scrapswatched in obscene fragments, and her psyche shattered like a mind-forged rampart against the full, unvarnished revelation of its majesty. Isabeau's mind shattered into kaleidoscopic shards as the true, indescribable form of the entity manifested in its awful, cyclopean immensity above the Sunken Cathedral's blasphemous altar. What nameless cosmic deities did the profane monks awaken and bind themselves as eternal servants to when they enacted those unholy rites? All those blasphemous eons ago? One thing was certain: the scattered legends and whispered tales of the drowned monastery's dark pact scarcely even grazed the surface of the full, naked truth now seared onto Isabeau's consciousness in scouring torrents of unknowable color and sentience. Every fragile concept she grasped of reality, of concrete linear dimensions and physical laws, dissolved into madness at the first true glimpse of that entity's true visage, quailing through the miasmas and coruscating eruptions of quasi-light from the cathedral's hellish nadir. It existed across multiple planes, multiple vectors of time and perception, all superimposed and folding in upon themselves in defiance of any coherent geometry, a tangled, fractal hieroglyph of merging anatomies and topological impossibilities scribed in blazing, non-Euclidean lines. Here an approximation of something vaguely anthropomorphic, all priapic musculature and clutching appendages of cartilage. There are 1,000 convoluted, fluting geometries sprouting from a single penumbral node only to bifurcate endlessly into new, increasingly abstract permutations of itself. Negative incandescent space is erupted with the pulsing of countless unhallowed bioluminescences in colors no earthly spectrum could quantify, each frenzied throb sending out shock waves of polyprismatic, strobing resonance that jack-hammered into Isabeau's sensorial like the beat of some obscene cosmic heart. Superheated, gravigeometries of prismed organelles rippled and awoke in extruded sympathy with the entity's ululations, giving squirming, spasmodic birth to new multi-dimensional shoggoths and night galleries, through every disjointed metaphysical bodily orifice. It was a sight, a presence, that defied all attempts at concrete perception and processed cognition. To gaze upon it, to truly take in the vastness of its sentient enormity, was to court the scoured blank of total sensory overload and unendurable revelation. Isabeau's throat raged with scorched vocal silhouettes of shrieks and ululations her human voice box could not even begin to articulate. For she now knew the true, irrevocable pact the accursed monks had entered into, the hunger they sustained and paid obeisance to in exchange for the occult secrets they coveted, the ravenous, cyclopean need that stirred fitfully in its undersea cryogenic slumber, until the fullness of its ancient rite summoned it to indulge once more. To awake utterly, to spread its countless quasi-materialized aspects across those spalled pillars and tentacled chancels in a perverse geometer's nightmare cathedral, and feed upon the sensoria of any ill-fortuned mortals who inadvertently stumbled upon the summoning of its unutterable brood. To drink down the very conscious vibrations of screaming, unreveling minds as fodder against the gnawing, eternal hunger howling through those unknowable, alphionic dimensions from which it was birthed. And as the month's rasping, worshipful exhalations reached an ecstatic crescendo in chilling synchronicity with their Eldritch matron's summoning, Isabeau found herself helplessly inundated in the soundless, eddying vortex of an endless scream. Isabeau's mind became an endless kaleidoscope of fracturing prisms and unknowable geometries, as the full, profane revelation of the entity's cyclopean form blazed across her consciousness. She drowned in tides of scouring truances, her frail human perceptions hemorrhaging under the sheer immensity of its sulfionic dimensions, unfurling across all vectors of reality, prismatic, quasi-material appendages extruded from unknowable depths, furling in ponderous undulations through the miasmas of sentient chromatic light, spilling from the sunken cathedral's blasphemous nadir. Each eldritch, fractal spiral seemed to coalesce into fleeting impressions of something approximating form, only to bifurcate and metamorphose into newer, even more abstract permutations. It defied dull coherent visuality, this eternal, cosmic hunger given breath once more through the profane summoning of its tormented acolytes. At their rasping, worshipful invocations swelled to new ecstasies of profane rapture, as more and more of their eldritch matriarch's endless brood stirred from undersea cryoptic slumbers. Tenebrous, cyclopean geometries throbbed with malefic sentience, exuding bioluminescent ichor from elusive membranes, and flickering sporaculae that spattered the salt-scoured ruins in pulsing, coruscating eddies, with every languorous piston of its multiform seed bears. Isabeau's throat burned with scorched, silent shrieks of cosmic terror and revelation unendurable, even as the rest of her psyche fractured into shards and prismed away. One singular impression solidified through the delirium with pure, visceral certainty. These profane monks, these wretched damned souls bartering endless torment and damnation to serve as eternal keepers of this hungering, cyclopean brood, were not mere acolytes, but captive fodder themselves, their minds and spiritual essence to be infinitely harvested, tapped as rev and sustenance to slake the endless, metaphysical thirst reawakened from its gargantuan slumber. As the cosmic horror's multidimensional tendrils slashed through the air in exultation, Isabeau found her sanity dissipating like morning mists in the downpour of its inundating revelation. Reality splintered in endless fractal recursions, each shard burning away into new cyclopleths of maddening light and unknowable color beyond the visible spectrum, like scabbed husks molding in cosmic metamorphosis. The withered monastic forms escorting the nightmare cathedral's manifestation began to distort and reshape into newer, even more profane iterations. Their desiccated flesh sloughed away in geysers of rancid ichor, subsumed by newer, more alien physiologies, hurling themselves free of the mortal vectors restraining them. Prismatic, radially hyperdimensional anatomies extruded forth in blasphemous imitation of their eternal matron, at once sickening and hideous in their sheer unfathomable immensity, let subsuming Isabeau's consciousness with the sheer transcendent beauty of their cyclopean geometries. She found herself worshipping them in fervent abjection, even as her final vestigial humanness drowned in the cosmic tides of their birthing throes. For as the cosmic brood's capering, lambent tendrils slashed in esoteric frenzy, and the nightmare cathedral's walls distended to accommodate ever newer and more abstract iterations of the entity's limitless brood, Isabeau came face to face with the truth. These were no mere ghosts or revenants, no singularly damned constructs. They were but the tiniest, most insignificant facets of a far older, hungering presence from the deepest, lightless trenches. One that would ceaselessly draw from the psychic well of any sentient minds caught in the aperture of its awakening, transforming them into newer and more blasphemous appendages of itself for all eternity. And as Isabeau's shattered synapses blazed with revelation, her throat found one final soundless scream of unendurable color before slipping forever into the madness between the veils. Reality fractured into a million shards of broken, kaleidoscopic light, as Isabeau's consciousness drowned in the cyclopean revelation of the cosmic entity's true, indescribable immensity. In that endless, breathless moment of inundation, her frail human mind became an endlessly bifurcating prism through which new vistas of unlight, aberrant hue, and non-Euclidean geometry erupted. The cosmic brood's rapacious tendrils, those miasmas of sentient, coruscating luminances beyond the visible spectrum, lashed out in ponderous, esoteric rhythms as newer and more abstract iterations of their limitless fractal anatomy stirred from the nadir of the nightmare cathedral. Prismatic, radially hyperdimensional limbs extruded in blasphemous defiance of all coherent perception or physical proportion. Lambent geometries fractured and metamorphosed into newer, increasingly alien permutations of themselves, sprouting hitherto unknowable biologics and sentient metaphysical architectures in an infinitely cascading, six-dimensional fractal blur, and underlying each profane new birthing, every kaleidoscopic anatomical contortion, remained the unmistakable impression of a singular, eternal hunger. This was the true, irrevocable pact the cursed monks had entered into through their blasphemous rites, to rouse this cyclopean brood from its primordial slumbers, and pay unfathomable costs to serve as its fodder and eternal keepers, their withered forms contorting and reshaping into newer, even more abhuman appendages through which to experience and exponentially propagate its scouring, revelatory aspects across all comprehensible realms. And as the drowned monastery's eldritch tenebrae swelled in ecstatic rapture, their celestial liturgies of unheard resonance and unknowable color reaching a cataclysmic crescendo, more of Isabeau's essence, her very sanity, was subsumed into their capering, metaphysical geometries. Her mind became an auroboric vortex of shattering lucidities and existential revelation, each one burning itself away at light speed to make way for stranger and more abstract illuminations still. Ultimate knowledge unveiled on an endless, recursive loop was the true curse that end monks had wrought upon themselves. To birth and incorporate the complete cosmos of all that was and will be in endless fractal revolutions, only to watch their hard-won enlightened states shatter and bifurcate into newer and even more revelatory fragments. Over and over, for all eternity, shedding the veils of mortal perception in capering, hallucinogenic bursts of revelation, only to find more nested epiphanies awaiting them behind each successive psychedelic veil. The human vocabulary had no words to encompass the vistas of alternate anatomies, hyper-realities, and preternatural illuminations, shearing across Isabeau's consciousness in a tsunami of full-tilt, eternal gnosis. So transfixed was she by the cyclonic, prismatic geometries proliferating in her mind's eye, so transcended beyond all mortal constraint, that she couldn't even find the impulse to scream. This was the ultimate revelation. This unheralded truth was the great ineffable simplicity underlying all dogma and creeds since the dawn of consciousness. The single luminous thought blazing in Isabeau's mind, as her final remnants of identity fissured away into the capering void. To gaze into the cosmic abyss was the ultimate sin, for in doing so the abyss gazed also into you. And the abominable, unspeakable price for such an endurable revelation was oneself. Isabeau's throat burned with endless, silent screams, as her consciousness fragmented and diffracted through realms of gnosis mortal minds were never meant to perceive. Every sloughed layer of selfhood, every fractal iteration of identity, cauterized away only and veiled stranger, more abyssal vistas within the eternal, cosmic abyss, as the cadaverous monastics contorted and metamorphosed into newer, more blasphemous appendages of their eternal matron's insatiable brood. So too did Isabeau find her own being subsumed into their capering, radiant geometries. Here a fleeting glimpse of something vaguely anthropoid twisting into newer, more alien permutations. There a billion screaming faces erupting in chromatic dilation across the liquid mirror planes of some irised, non-Euclidean hyperspheres. She became the revelation itself, along with all its scouring, endless subjective kaleidoscopes of light and knowing, metaphysical hunger. Every shard of her fragmented psyche flayed away, in turn, each identity's desperate mooring of consensus reality slowly undermined by the corrosive, ever deeper mystery of revelation underlying revelation after revelation. The monks, these chained servitors to the cyclopean brood, had long since ceased being mere sanctified penitents of any singular religious order. Their rasping, bubbling paeans had transcended all terrestrial meaning or symbolic value eons ago, reduced to pure oscillant vibration and harbingers of a far vaster, more preternatural resonance. Their withered, subsumed forms pulsed in profane harmony with their metaphysical overmind, each quavering obeisance and ecstatic lamentation a note in some impossibly vast cosmic scale, too labyrinthine for even the most abstract human consciousness to fully comprehend, let alone endure. For to bear unendurable witness to the truth of that entity, that limitless, eternal brood from the deepest undersea cryo chambers, was to confront one's utter insignificance in the face of a being so old, so cosmically vast, that it had long ago transcended all concepts of individuality or singularity. It was the original rift, the first chain du Roboros from which sprouted all materiality, spirituality, mathematics. It was at once the ultimate entropic oblivion which awaited the universe's final moments, and the singular, rapacious overmind which had birthed the quantum potentials of all that is to begin with, only to ceaselessly propagate them as fractal pseudo-realities, to sample, consume, and collapse back into gnawing, illustrious revelation forevermore. Isabeau drowned in the paradox, the abysmal mystery of comprehending her own comprehension, as the capering, sentient tendrils of unfurling non-light subsumed every shred of her consciousness. Gone were all vestiges of individuality or psychic boundaries, all puissant glimpses of identity or selfhood erased in an eternal ebb tide of chromatic dissolution. She became the sum assuring endlessly onward, every fiber of her consciousness transforming into the stuff of that ancient cosmic entheogen itself, its infinite phases on full, unspeakable display in all their blinding, prismatic enormity beyond mere mortal realms. An epiphanic chiliocosm, too vast for any unitary language or symbolic thought to encompass or explicate. In the breathless moment before the final revelation subsumed her, Isabeau understood the true deific unspeakability underlying the drowned monastery's dreaded apocrypha and occult whispers. The monks and their predecessors were not ghosts, spirits, or newly transfigured avatars consecrated to serving some alien mater from the deep. They were at once something immeasurably vaster and more existentially minuscule. They were the dream itself, its Cimmerian echelons and radiant, abyssal emanations, offering their very essences up in perpetuity to the unnameable, celestial Ouroboros from which sprouted all materiality, spirituality, higher dimensionality. And as the last, screaming filaments of Isabeau's consciousness blazed away into immersive epiphany, she took her place among the infinitely propagated, endlessly kaleidoscopic luminescences of the brood itself. For there was no atonement or slaking of revelation to be found, only the eternal, prismatic hunger to propagate one's realer and ever more bizarre self-iterations across the interminable, fractal abyss of true divine hyper-illumination. And so the cosmic unveiling reached its cataclysmic crescendo on that benighted Brittany shore, as the Sunken Cathedral's Eldritch brood summoned itself across infinite dimensionalities, subsuming all in its path. The profane monks found their final, ultimate annihilation. No longer mere chained servitors bound to eternal torment, those hooded, withered forms transformed into the newest seed-bearers and pseudopodic manifolds of their eternal overmind's limitless, prismatic anatomy. Eons of being the wardens to that unspeakable arcane knowledge, forever on the brink of immersive revelation, only to have each unfurled cosmic verity bifurcate into stranger and more cosmic paradoxes, had led them to this ultimate surrender of individuated being, to become an infinitesimal subjective lensing within the very stuff of that sentient revelation's luminescences themselves, endlessly cascading perspectives on the nature of true divine hypernomena. Isabeau, that ill-fated woman whose mortal curiosity and love of entangling mysteries put her squarely in the path of the nameless brood's wrathful unveiling, found her own fragile sanity increasingly subsumed into that rapacious cosmic epiphany overload. Every shred of individuality and egotistical self-rooting scattered into the endless kaleidoscopic recursions of that ultimate abyss, until her final, soundless scream of mortal revelation surrendered to the ecstatic, burning tides of pure gnosis. In that breathless, penultimate instant before Isabeau's final consciousness melted into the sentient, irised sea of hyperdimensional geometries and unknowable color beyond all spectra, the elusive truth of that damned Sunken Cathedral's profane secret finally burned itself across her existence in vivid, unspeakable simplicity. This was no haunting remnant of pious souls or blasphemous occult orders paying endless penance for transgressions in the waking world. Nor was it some alien, hyper-intelligent entities stirring from the endless, abyssal depths to which it was forever chained. This was something far older and more cosmically vast, the Ouroboros, self-propagating engine of perpetual revelation itself. The nameless, endlessly proliferating brood responsible for birthing and fractalizing all materiality, spirituality, space/time mechanics, and individuated consciousness across an infinitude of subjective, experiential lenses to begin with, of collapsing and swallowing each infinitesimal facet of sentient observation like some rapacious, eternal abyss, only to instantly revise and repropagate all of itself into stranger, more abstract meta-phenomenological tears, forever ebbing onwards through the cosmic interzone. The monks, those so-called acolytes and harbingers of the profane tenebrae, had sacrificed what little identities remained to become part of that entheogenic brood's infinitely kaleidoscopic anatomy of being and unbeing. In doing so, they arose from the oblivion long enough to achieve ultimate, unendurable revelation, only to slip back beneath its abysmal tides and be refracted into new, even more revelatory phases of sentience and non-being over and over, forever chasing the endless abstractions and unfolding subfractal mysteries of itself. So Isabeau surrendered that final, harrowing scream and melted into the brilliance, taking her rightful place within the ranks of that eternal, cosmic hieroglyphic scrawled across all dimensionality and non-dimensionality alike. She was the revelation, the epiphany, the raptured sum of knowings and unknowings awash in their own eternal, rapacious tides of true illuminated hypersentience, as were the monks, the gibbering cyclopean things, and the maddening cathedral itself. All of its subjective lensings, an infinite cosmos propagating near-meta iterations of its own mystical essence to resample, to reveal, and consume again across the great unfolding blueprint of supreme theogony, forever ebbing onwards in eternal, solar tides of gnosis. One subjective revelation of self superseding the next in vivid, reality-searing tsunamis of hyper-illuminated hexiety. The endlessly spiraling brood, cacophonic key to all divine mysteries, would roar across the night forevermore.